Hello friends, welcome back to the Brown Leather Couch here in Midtown Manhattan, coming to you live Wednesday, February 4th, right on the dot, 5 p.m. Eastern time. What is it, 22 hours away from the NBA trade deadline, where all that, the limit on activity coming 3 p.m. Eastern tomorrow has generated a ton of activity today. We've had an Anthony Davis trade. We've had a ton of other news and notes, but let's get right into it and start off with the brow, going to the Washington Wizards. And I don't think I even said my name. I am Jake Fischer, your resident NBA insider for all things Bleacher Report, but we just have been on the phones, texting and calling and chatting all day long. So let's just get right to the news. Anthony Davis goes to Washington, which, look, I had been hearing for some time now that the Wizards were looking at finding trade avenues for Chris Middleton's $33 million expiring contract, and that they were looking to use his deal similar to how the Wizards turned CJ McCollum's expiring contract into Trae Young. However, the Wizards were specifically looking at seeing what Chris Middleton's contract could bring back Washington in their front court. We knew that the Wizards had called Sacramento about trading for Domantas Sabonis. That was one of the two options between Toronto and Washington that Sacramento officials were looking at as a potential outcome for the all-star big man in the Kings. So I had also heard that the Wizards have not reported this anywhere yet or written this anywhere yet. I'd also heard the Wizards called New York in a similar capacity about this type of framework for Karl-Anthony Towns. So I'm not going to lie with you guys. I'm a little disappointed in myself that I did not connect the dots. That's what we try to do here on the NBA Insider video live stream notebook. Connect dots, gather intel, try to get to you some type of information before these deals come together. And I had heard from Dallas that there was a quote-unquote mystery Eastern Conference team that was in the mix for Anthony Davis. It was not Toronto. It was not Atlanta. Both the Hawks and the Raptors have been saying for some time that they were kind of out on AD after his hand injury. And I was racking my brain trying to figure out what this surprise Eastern Conference team could be. People were whispering about Cleveland. Everyone thought the Cavs, whether they were going out for Giannis or AD, was going to be a whole thing. It turns out it's the Washington Wizards, an absolute stunner. But again, that process of Washington pitching Chris Middleton plus draft capital, that was something they were looking to do. And they were having conversations with Sacramento, but the Kings wanted more draft capital than what the Wizards were willing to part with. Clearly, at the end of the day, 2 first-round picks and 3 second-round picks, plus an intriguing recent first-round selection in A.J. Johnson, who, if you recall, came to Washington alongside Chris Middleton from Milwaukee this time last year in that deadline deal that flipped Chris Middleton for Kyle Kuzma. So depending on your evaluation of A.J. Johnson, who's still just 21 years old, he could kind of count as another first-round type of draft capital evaluation in this deal. But to bring it to Dallas's perspective, overall, I would say that not exactly the major haul that you would want for Luka Doncic when you combine this return with Cam Christie and a first-round pick. That's the storyline here. It's a fascinating move for the Wizards, who clearly have viewed Alex Sarr as someone who can play with another big man in the front court. That's been an ongoing dynamic around the league. We've seen team after team, starting with the Houston Rockets playing Steven Adams and Alperen Şengün together in the playoffs. Oklahoma City having Isaiah Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren together. The Wolves for years, starting first with Rudy Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns. Now they've got that big lineup that they run sometimes with Jaden McDaniels, Naz Reid, Julius Randle, and Rudy Gobert all on the floor. And they're looking at Giannis as well. We'll get to that later on in the show. The Wizards clearly think that Alex Sarr and Anthony Davis can thrive together in the front court. And that is something that was the driving force behind Washington wanting to look at all types of big men, not just Anthony Davis, and it brings just a final conclusion to everything in Dallas following the Luka Doncic trade. They are still looking in Dallas to part ways with Daniel Gafford if and only if they can get a first-round pick. That's the only other deal that I am anticipating right now for the Mavericks, because the other piece of the puzzle in Dallas was looking to get off of D'Angelo Russell. We had talked about last week that there could be something with the Bucks assuming D'Angelo Russell's contract. We're still hearing that the Bucks could potentially bring on Cam Thomas. We're waiting to work on that. Maybe that trade will even break as we're on today's show. But Dallas, for now, I think the only other leftover item there is the Mavericks looking for first-round draft capital for Daniel Gafford. The Atlanta Hawks were interested in Daniel Gafford. They just swung a 3-team deal that brings Jock Landale to Atlanta. I've been told that that rules out the Hawks essentially for any further center move. They were a team that was talking seconds for Daniel Gafford, but the Mavericks wanted a first, so the Hawks move on and just get a deal done for Jock Landale. Let's get to the chat. We had a ton of Lakers questions in the chat, a ton of Lakers questions. And look, I see that the Lakers fans in here want to know about Giannis. And we wrote about this yesterday on the Stein Line, my joint Substack effort with the Hall of Famer Mark Stein. If you're not subscribed, markstein.substack.com. So much of this trade activity, we've been writing some type of concept about all this stuff all day long, all week long, before it all comes out. And then we come to you here on the Bleacher Report app to talk about it after it all hits. But with the Lakers, they, I think, very pragmatically and realistically understand they are not in the mix for Giannis right now at this juncture. If he does end up still being in Milwaukee beyond the deadline, which, again, we'll get to it later in the show, right now that seems to be more likely than not the outcome for the Bucks. Then at that point in time, the Lakers, when they will have access to more draft capital and they'll have a ton of cap space, that's when the Lakers believe they'll have at least some type of opportunity to factor into the Giannis Antetokounmpo trade sweepstakes. But for now, we have not heard anything about the Lakers really trying to elbow their way into conversations that Milwaukee is having with Giannis. That still remains centered on Golden State, Miami, and Minnesota at this juncture. Please, any Magic news? What are the Celtics going to do? Well, the Celtics already made a major move. They got their starting center that they wanted and got off of Anthony Simons' money to the point where they got under the first apron altogether. What a win for Boston. Orlando is definitely positioned to make a move to get under the luxury tax as well, whether that's Tyus Jones, whether that's moving on from Jet Howard. There's been some interest in Goga Batadze right now, but I don't think the Magic want to trade him, so we'll see what happens there. Anything for the Nets? Well, we talked about Cam Thomas. That's something that I think, Cam Thomas, I reported earlier today, is not with Brooklyn as the Nets flew from New York here, not too far from our Bleacher Report studios, down to Orlando for tomorrow night's game. He is being officially ruled out for personal reasons, but those personal reasons are because he is absolutely in trade conversations. The one team I've heard definitively is interested in Cam Thomas is the Milwaukee Bucks. So I see here, the Bucks don't have a second-round pick to trade. What would they send? I don't know what the package will be, to be honest. I've really just heard Milwaukee. I've heard some Cleveland buzz, but I think that was potentially more of a Nets idea to flip him for Lonzo Ball in the salary dump that Cleveland did for that veteran point guard. Of course, Lonzo Ball goes out the door now to Utah in a 3-team deal that just went live right before we came live here on the Bleacher Report app and on YouTube as well. Let's keep it moving because I got a hard out of 5:30 today. The Sixers moved Jared McCain. That is Philadelphia's move to get under the luxury tax as well. They got back a first-round pick in 2026 this year from Houston, so that'll be a late first, which is right around where they took Jared McCain. I believe he was 21 overall. No, he was 15th overall a few years ago, 16th overall, whatever it was. From there, the Sixers also got 3 second-rounders, which to me, to my understanding, Daryl Morey valued the opportunity of getting draft capital in the process of getting under the luxury tax. So instead of just moving off of an Eric Gordon or an Andre Drummond or something like that, they got draft picks back and got under the luxury tax. It's a pretty tough pill to swallow, though, I think, for some Sixers fans. And I'll say that as someone from Philadelphia. My younger brother texted me, pissed off about it. My group chat of all of my high school fantasy football buddies not thrilled with the news. But on the other hand, it does give the Sixers plenty of wiggle room to bring Dominic Barlow off of a two-way contract and give him a significant contract, maybe even above the veteran minimum, to keep him in the fold this year. It also sets them up to be in position to bring back Quentin Grimes, who is on a one-year qualifying offer after his restricted free agency negotiations and his rookie scale extension negotiations did not go well with Philadelphia all summer and into the fall. So for Philly, I don't think this is any precursor to a bigger move that's coming. I think this move is really just salary clearing, freeing up financial flexibility for Philadelphia this summer, potential on the buyout market, and particularly right now to bring Dominic Barlow in on a full roster spot off of the two-way contract that he's been starting on them for some time now. To the chat, anything new with Miami? The Heat continue to be mentioned as one of the few potential John Morant landing spots, so we'll get to them a little bit down the road. Same thing with these questions about Giannis and Golden State. Do I think the Cavs are going to make one more trade before the deadline? The Cavs have made so many trades. How many more Cavs trades do you want? I think Cleveland has been one of, if not the absolute stories of the trade deadline, flipping Darius Garland for James Harden, turning DeAndre Hunter into Keon Ellis and Dennis Schroeder. They have been as active as anybody. Let's keep this show moving right along because a lot of the chat will help us lead into our topics down the line. But the Bulls clearly are still in a position loaded with guards because we knew they were looking at Kobe White trades after bringing in not just Jaden Ivey, but Anthony Simons from Boston as well in that Nikola Vucevic trade. And they also had Mike Conley Jr., who came in that three-team deal with Jaden Ivey from Minnesota. So first, quickly there, something that has really not been a very common practice in the NBA, Mike Conley being traded first to Chicago and then to Charlotte in a deal that also brings Colin Sexton back to Chicago in the wake of Kobe White joining the Hornets, if you're following all that. Mike Conley's been traded twice now. So that allows Mike Conley kind of a CBA loophole to be bought out or waived by the Hornets and then go back to Minnesota on a veteran minimum contract. That is the expectation around the league right now. And that would not have been legal or eligible to be happening under the collective bargaining agreement if Mike Conley was just traded to Chicago and waived, because you cannot be traded to one team, waived, and then return to your original club. You have to be traded multiple times. So Mike Conley, following that path from Minnesota to Chicago to Charlotte, will free him up to go back and rejoin Anthony Edwards and the Timberwolves in that locker room where he has had a very strong veteran presence and voice for several years now. But that also leaves Colin Sexton still with Ayo Dosunmu and Anthony Simons, and they've got Josh Giddey obviously running the show. There is so much still to come, I think, in the Bulls backcourt. Nothing definitive at this moment, but they have had trade conversations with Ayo Dosunmu, and people are still wondering whether or not Anthony Simons will potentially get moved to a different destination. But Chicago has been one of the stories of the deadline as well, a team that has kind of, petered in the middle of the league for years now. They have not necessarily wanted to commit either way to a direction, either go all in and be a real buyer. There was some talk earlier in the year when they started the season 6-1 about could they package their expiring contracts and draft capital and go after an Anthony Davis or a Domantas Sabonis. There's been some buzz this week, unconfirmed buzz, but people have been whispering, okay, would they go after Giannis? Would they try to get John Morant? And instead, Chicago has been in a total sell rebuild situation for the better, in my opinion, I think, in Bulls fans' opinions. And to give some type of clarity on the marketplace has been beneficial for everyone, because Chicago has just kind of been this black box in the middle of the East for years now. So they are clearly fully in a rebuild with Josh Giddey really cemented as the only piece alongside Matas Buzelis, those two guys in their starting lineup. Again, there's nothing, to my understanding right now, that's developing for Ayo Dosunmu, but we'll see. We'll see. And the rest of Chicago's glut of guards. What's interesting also, in conjunction with all of the Chicago activity, the Bulls were definitely projecting to be buyers on the wing market this summer. They were a team that we were hearing mentioned for the likes of Peyton Watson, Benedict Mathurin, and other, Tari Eason, guys that were going to be restricted free agents, and Chicago would have had an opportunity to throw an aggressive offer sheet and steal them away. Now the opportunity on the wing there seems a little bit more cluttered. So that's another domino effect of all of Chicago's activity to keep monitoring as we get closer to the summer. And then the other thing, with Nikola Vucevic out, Chicago has been looking around at young big men, most particularly been linked to Yves Missi in New Orleans the last couple of weeks. We'll see if they end up making a trade right there. But for now, there has been no other real definitive, transaction or tangible detail about who Chicago could be looking at as a center, but they do not have a center of the future. So that's still something that we are looking at for Chicago, either before Thursday's deadline, and if not, definitely something into the summer. Back to the chat. Anything on the Knicks? New York, like I said at the top of this show, not expected to be a major player for Giannis Antetokounmpo right now. I think the Knicks are pretty well aware that they do not have the young blue chip prospect or the draft capital that Milwaukee is hoping to look back or to get back in any potential Giannis package. Maybe come this summer when New York has more first-round picks available, and depending on how their playoff push goes through the Eastern Conference, where they absolutely have expectations of winning the championship, not just winning the East, but winning the NBA title at large. That will kind of be, I think, where New York goes with Giannis, if at all. Right now, the Knicks, everything we've heard has still stemmed from their work exploring the market for what Gershon Yabusele and Pacom Dadier together could get them on the marketplace. We've heard several things, but nothing that's gained actual serious traction to this point. But that is definitely a piece of this entire trade deadline puzzle that we are working on and trying to decipher as we get closer to tomorrow, Thursday, at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm seeing questions here about, the Warriors need to make a trade, Jonathan Kuminga trade. The Warriors are still in the mix for Giannis Antetokounmpo, and to my understanding, the last I checked, I have not checked with Golden State too recently before we came live here, to be clear. But last I checked, definitely as of last night and early this morning, Golden State was still holding out hope that they could be a Giannis team, and any Jonathan Kuminga deal that could happen, I think is certainly on hold for whatever possible opportunity comes for the Warriors to go to become Giannis Antetokounmpo's next home. Any Nuggets news? The Nuggets are holding pat. They definitely will make Denver, Phoenix, Orlando are still the teams off top of mind that we are projecting and waiting to see what type of luxury tax clearing move that they are going to do. We saw Philadelphia do it today. We saw Toronto do it today. Cleveland has shed a ton of salary throughout all of their moves. Lonzo Ball was the final piece of that. Boston got under the first apron. Denver, Phoenix, Orlando are still the teams that we are looking at for making a luxury tax saving move. For the Nuggets, it'll probably be something more along the lines of just parting ways with a Hunter Tyson type deal, someone who's not in their rotation, and probably prefer to do someone like Hunter Tyson compared to a Julian Strawther than him. Anything new with Miami? We were talking about the Heat still looming as a potential Ja Morant destination. So let's take that to our next item here on the docket. Giannis and Ja, are they going to get dealt? Those are the big names after Trae Young, James Harden, Darius Garland, Jaren Jackson Jr., Nikola Vucevic, and Anthony Davis. 6 people who have all been named to the All-Star game in their careers. They've all changed teams and been traded since we started this trade season right now. So, will Giannis and Ja make it 7-8? That is what the whole league is waiting on. That's what my colleague Molly Morrison's waiting on. She cornered me in the kitchen and said, "Where's Ja Morant going?" For now, the Kings have continued to signal that they are not a team in the mix for Ja Morant. The Grizzlies have thought they would be. So outside of Sacramento, outside of maybe something with Milwaukee as they continue to navigate the Giannis sweepstakes, Miami's really been the only other team we've heard linked to Ja Morant all throughout all of this. But the Heat have not been willing to give anything of real consequence or real value to the Grizzlies. And I think no one really has, which is why we've been reporting since this morning on the Stein line that the Grizzlies have dramatically dropped their asking price for Ja Morant. I've heard that they have been willing to take back future money in order to assume draft capital. But at this point in time, it seems very, very clear that it is more likely than not Ja Morant will be exiting Memphis in a deal very similar to Trae Young's departure from Atlanta, where the Grizzlies are not going to be getting plus value. They'll probably be taking on maybe salary dump situation stuff, maybe even more future money than Ja Morant's deal. But we're not expecting the Grizzlies to have plus value coming in for Ja Morant leaving. That is for sure. Could it be Milwaukee? That's something that's intrigued me all along because the Bucks have never given any indication that they are definitely moving Giannis. And we've also gotten some buzz that the Bucks have some type of hope that if they keep Giannis beyond the deadline, if they have some lottery luck, right now they're slated to have a top 10 pick. Could that pick jump up to 2? It can't be the number 1 pick. If it's the number 1 pick, it goes to Atlanta. The Hawks own the better of Milwaukee or New Orleans is first. So the Atlanta has 2 cracks at the number 1 pick, and then the second of those 2 picks will be going to Milwaukee. So if the Bucks finish 1 and the Pelicans finish 2 in the lottery, number 1 goes to Atlanta, number 2 goes to New Orleans, and vice versa. If New Orleans get the top pick and the Bucks get second, then the Bucks keep their pick and New Orleans' pick goes to Atlanta. So what could Milwaukee do at that point in time? Could they trade the number 2 pick for someone of super consequence that keeps Giannis in the fold? That's what Portland tried to do a couple years ago, if you recall, when the Blazers had the number 3 selection and they ended up taking Scoot Henderson. But before that, the Blazers were shopping that number 3 pick all around the league. They were trying to get Bam Adebayo from Portland, and they pitched getting OG Anunoby from Toronto and all these other kinds of aspects, but there wasn't much interest in that selection. This year would probably be different because this year, this draft is best drafts in recent memory with a bunch of top tier prospects, some franchise changing talents, most notably Darren Peterson, Cam Boozer, and AJ Dembonsa from BYU. So, would the Bucks cracking that top 3, would that be enough? Would they have enough interest to generate a trade that brings in another co-star for Giannis? And would they be able to sell him on staying here? Because Giannis just gave 2 interviews to Eric Name, and I'm going to butcher Jim's last name, but Jim Orlowski, the 2 Bucks beat writers. Giannis gave one-on-one direct interviews last night saying, I would still love to stick around in Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee itself, the Bucks franchise in particular. So if you're the Bucks and you hear that and you have been holding on to hope all along that he will stay, it's just too much to think that the Bucks won't try to keep him at large. But if the Bucks do move Giannis to Golden State, it would probably have Draymond Green going in that situation. And that is why we saw last night Draymond speaking openly and honestly about the prospect of last night being Golden State's Draymond Green's last game in a Golden State jersey, because the Warriors have been very clear that they do not want to part ways with Jimmy Butler in any potential Giannis Antetokounmpo trade. They made it clear they didn't want to part ways with Jimmy Butler to go after Anthony Davis. So if they're going to get Giannis, the only way to do that from a salary matching standpoint, along with Jonathan Kuminga, is to part with Draymond Green. So that's really the situation here that the Warriors are weighing. They are looking at if Green and Kuminga and all their picks will be enough to convince Milwaukee to finally part ways with Giannis Antetokounmpo. But if they don't get Giannis, then where do they go from there? I see a question in the chat here saying, if the Warriors miss out on Giannis, could they sneak in on Ja? I would be floored if Golden State brought Ja Morant into the Bay. That is never something I have heard the Warriors have been considering. I think ultimately for Golden State, they are still going to want to part ways with Jonathan Kuminga, turn him into something. There were some type of conversations again between the Warriors and Miami about Andrew Wiggins. The Heat were saying they did not want to part with Wiggins for Jonathan Kuminga. They wanted to use his salary for a bigger star addition. But if they can't use him in a Giannis deal, then I think maybe that opens the door. There's still some thought, at least on Jonathan Kuminga's side, that Miami could be a likely suitor there. But at this point in time, I am not confident that the Warriors are going to be able to get Giannis Antetokounmpo. So I do think they're going to have to really shift back into seeing what type of stuff they can turn Jonathan Kuminga into. They're not going to be able to get their top target, Trey Murphy from New Orleans. All indications remain that the Pelicans do not want to part with him. They don't want to trade Herb Jones, same as Zion Williamson. We'll see other moves down the Pelicans roster. They would love to get off of Jordan Poole, but I haven't heard of any interest there around the league. They're talking Yves Missi trades as well, like we've mentioned before. So we'll see where that goes. But for now, let's round today's show out with just a couple more chats here. Again, a tax question. How many teams are left in the tax that can realistically duck it now? Orlando, Denver, Phoenix are the teams we're looking at. Phoenix has Nick Richards' contract that they're looking to move, that they almost moved to Toronto. So if the Raptors, who are not involved with Jakob Poeltl anymore, which we've gotten pretty strong word from Sacramento that they don't really think a deal is going to happen anytime soon, would Toronto pivot back to Nick Richards? That's something. But Denver, they'll make a small move. Orlando will make some type of move. They'll get under the tax as well. We already got to this question about Cleveland making another move. The Cavs absolutely made a major financial just restructuring, going from DeAndre Hunter to Keon Ellis and Dennis Schroeder, flipping Darius Garland for James Harden. And that Darius Garland for James Harden trade, again, is super important because James Harden will be up for a new deal that will likely result in a 2-year agreement that will line up with the following 2 years of Donovan Mitchell's contract. The Cavs hope he will then sign an extension this summer. That will do it for today's show. Thank you to the chat. As always, we will be back tomorrow. I'm in studio as early as 10 a.m. tomorrow. I'll be popping in and out of the app, and I'll be definitely sitting on this couch from 1:30 to 3:30. So for now, thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate it. We appreciate you rocking with us now. This has been 8 shows in 10 days. We got one more show, one more day. Or actually, no, 7 shows in 9 days. We got 2 more days because we got all day tomorrow, and then Friday we'll recap it all as well. But for now, we'll see you back here on the Bleacher Report app tomorrow. And thank you for tuning in. Appreciate it.